If only you hadn't looked back. Though it was autumn, the day had seemed long and the brief walk toward home short. As the sunlight began to fade, you and your two friends left the playground behind and trudged reluctantly home, knowing that you would be forced to pick up the games and conversations the next day. The next day that never came. If only you hadn't looked back. You had. Turning just for a moment, you had glanced back toward the tree line, seeing the fingers of their branches clawing up towards the sky, and beside them, a figure. At first you thought you must be mistaken, that your eyes in the hazy blur of twilight were playing tricks on you. But no, when you looked again, he was there. Taller than any man could be, thinner than even the willowy branches that extended ever upward from the trees, loomed in the distance, like the shadow of some dark, horrible truth. You knew instantly that you had to look away because that if you didn't tear your eyes from the blank, featureless face, then soon the blank would wash over you, become you, and you would walk slowly but surely, as if pulled by some magnetic force toward him. Toward him, though, you feared him. Though you were scared of his unnatural height, the aching, blank whiteness of his face, arms that seemed to stretch towards you, and the slithering tentacles. You turned, screwing up your eyes, willing yourself not to look, not to see, not to give in and go to him. You screamed to the others, telling them the same, telling them to not look. But as you opened your eyes, you realized they had already looked. They were already gone. Possibly the most famous creepypasta character of all time, and certainly the one that has crossed most frequently into mainstream media, the Slenderman, also known as Slenderman, is a character born of a variety of earlier influences, but which itself represents an evolution in the uses and development of folklore. Violent, real-life events linked to the Slenderman character increased its infamy, and even led to a moral panic based around the possible negative influences and danger that the fictional character posed to children. Though adaptation and modification by various authors means that Slenderman's appearance can vary somewhat depending upon the source, the most common features remain the same. The character is usually depicted as an abnormally tall humanoid, usually wearing a dark suit and tie. Slenderman's face is almost always completely featureless and often either white or a pale gray, though in some depictions, this blank face does feature an animalistic mouth. Slenderman is often said to be able to extend or stretch his limbs, particularly his arms at will, and either has tentacles protruding just visible from his back or has tentacle-like appendages in place of his arms. The character commonly inhabits liminal spaces such as the entrance to woods and forest or areas of abandoned ground on the outskirts of more populated areas. Whilst there are a wide variety of Slenderman stories out there, much of the character's effectiveness comes from the fact that there is no single definitive version, the initial posts that introduce the character being only fragmentary quotes linked to an image rather than an actual short story or complete narrative. Much like his appearance, however, though the details alter, some elements seem to remain as constants, such as the character appearing by woods or forests, enticing children away from their parents and friends never to be seen again. Another common trope that the Slenderman exerts an influence upon the victims, making them the perpetrators of crimes or violent actions. The character has also been said to cause illness, particularly a cough known as slender sickness, and to induce those who encounter him to suicide. These latter features, namely incitement to violence or suicide, became more prevalent and commonly associated with the character in a case of art, life after real-life violent events, or cases of attempted suicide were linked to the character. Despite some media outlets adding to the aura of the Slenderman mythos by claiming that the figure's origins are unclear, in fact, the character's origin is easily traceable. Slenderman in his original form was created by Eric Knudsen under the alias Victor Search. Knudsen was responding to a call on Something Awful for posters to contribute digitally altered photographs that would then serve as the basis for new mythologies or stories. Knudsen's efforts, posted on June 10, 2009, showed groups of teenagers and children with the now familiar figure of Slenderman standing in the background. At first glance, the images seem normal, but the figure's anomalous size and featureless face, once noticed, give the pictures an eerie and unsettling feeling. Alongside the images, Knudsen provided small snippets of out-of-context text, purported to be witness accounts that give hints about the scenes depicted and their relation to the anomalous figure of the Slenderman. By attaching short snippets of text with his images, Knudsen transformed the lone image into the first Slenderman story, albeit in a non-linear and fragmentary form. Following this initial appearance, the Slenderman character was then picked up by other users, who would either fit him into their own narratives or wrote short accounts of alleged encounters with the character, sculpting as they did some of the features recognized today. With each new detail and new account, posters helped in building a mythos around the character that, because of its viral scope and myriad of conflicting details and accounts, did not retain a canon version, and this process happened fast. The day after Knudsen's post, a user named LeechCode5 posted a photo with a backstory featuring Slenderman. By 14th of June, a user named Trenchmall had used Slenderman in his own story. A user known as ThoroUp posted a story about a figure in Germany who stalked children on the edge of the forest, providing an invented historical reference point for the character. On June 20th of the same year, Slenderman became the subject of a YouTube video series based upon an earlier Something Awful post by user Troy Wagner. The series, which alleged to detail interaction or discoveries about the Slenderman, made Wilkes working on a film project called Marble Hornets. This series of videos was supported by a Twitter feed, and a second YouTube channel followed the character to move from being a text, image, and forum-based phenomena to being an ARG, with the character now being referred to, discussed, and modified across a number of different platforms and modalities by an ever-growing number of contributors. Much of the fascination with Slenderman is rooted in the overall aura of mystery that he is wrapped in. Despite the fact that it is rumored he kills children almost exclusively, it is difficult to say whether or not his only objective is slaughter. Oftentimes it is either reported or recorded that he can be found in sections of woods, and these generally tend to be suburban. He also has been reported seen with large groups of children, as many photographs portray. It is commonly thought that he resides in woods and forests and preys on children. He seems unconcerned with being exposed in the daylight or captured in photos. It is often thought as well that he enjoys stalking people who become overly paranoid about his existence, purposefully giving them glimpses of himself in order to further frighten. For this reason, it seems like Slenderman very much enjoys psychologically torturing his victims. He also often appears to float or drift around rather than walk, which suggests the possibility of him being an ethereal being rather than a creature or a man. This would also explain why he is able to remain immobile in spite of his poorly proportioned body. Even though Slenderman was fabricated on Something Awful forms, was he? Some people have already claimed sightings. He is seen mostly at night, peering into open windows, and walks out in front of lone motorists on secluded roads. His main intentions appear to be kidnapping children, as when he is seen near them in photographs, they usually disappear shortly afterward. The Slenderman has also inspired many stories, such as those of Marble Hornets. In the end, though, his purpose remains unknown. The earliest argued reference to the legend is within the cave paintings found in the Surda Capivara National Park in the northeast of Brazil, which are believed to date from as far back as 9000 BC. These paintings show a strangely elongated character leading a child by the hand, but make no reference to the extra appendages. The next known possible reference to the Slenderman comes from around 3100 BC in Lower Egypt, with references to the thief of the gods, or the thief of Kuk, becoming commonplace during the reign of Pharaoh Wasner. Hieroglyphic carvings representing the thief were found in the pharaoh's tomb, who was rumored to have had some kind of encounter with the entity. The carvings resemble a strange figure with multiple upper limbs, one that has never been found in any other hieroglyph language. Renowned German woodcutter Hans Freckenberg created at least 2 woodcuts featuring a character he described as Der Ritter, the Knight, during the mid-16th century that were discovered in Hausberg Castle in 1883. Wilkes Freckenberg was well known for his realistic depiction of human anatomy, something that was unusual among woodcuts of the time. His pictures featured a skeletal, multi-limbed character. Historians are unsure of the exact symbolic nature of the character, with some claiming that it is a personification of the religious wars that raged in Europe at the time, while others say it represents the mysterious plagues that have been believed to be the reason for the mysterious abandoning of the Hausberg Castle in the nearby village in 1543. However, many insist that Freckenberg was attempting to represent Der Grossmann, the tall man. According to legend, he was a fairy who lived in the Black Forest. Bad children who crept into the woods at night would be relentlessly chased by Der Grossmann, who wouldn't leave them be until he either caught them or they were forced to tell their parents of their wrongdoing. Even then, there is a chilling account from an old journal dating from about 1702. My child, my Lars, he is gone, taken from his bed. The only thing that we found was a scrap of black clothing. It feels like cotton, but it is softer, thicker. Lars came into my bedroom yesterday, screaming at the top of his lungs that the angel is outside. I asked him what he was talking about, and he told me some nonsense fairy story about Der Grossmann. He said he went into the Grosbeyer village and he found one of my cows dead, hanging from a tree. I thought nothing of it at first, but now he's gone. We must find Lars, and my family must leave before we are killed. I am sorry, my son. I should have listened. May God forgive me. There is also a Romanian fairy tale which tells the legend of the tall man, featuring this description which may have taken to refer to the Slenderman. The tall man stood in a clearing, dressed as a nobleman, all in black. Shadows lay over him, dark as a cloudy midnight. He had many arms, all long and boneless as snakes, all sharp as swords, and they writhed like worms on nails. He did not speak, but made his intentions known. In the fairy tale, the tall man caused his mother to kill her husband and child before he slid from the fireplace and clenched her in his burning embrace. There is also an English myth referring to the tree man, who is said to have a slim body with appendages that look like tree branches. He is only known to be seen in the woods and was used as a story that parents told their children to thwart bad behavior. There have been quite a few disappearances of children that have been said to be linked to the tree man. Far from being simply a flash in the pan internet meme, Slenderman, and particularly the way in which the character grew within the public consciousness, has been the subject of serious academic investigation within the world of folklore studies. Scholars pointing out that the aspects of collectivity, variability, and performance in the development and spread of the Slenderman story identify as a true piece of folklore. The egalitarian way in which the character was constructed, his attributes, characteristics, and intentions being argued about and discussed by a range of different contributors and the fact that the details might change depending upon who is telling the tale and to whom is fascinating to folklorists, some of whom have argued that the development of Slenderman in this way demonstrates a new stage in the evolution of folklore as a whole. The argument basically goes that prior to the invention of the printed word, folklore was spread by word of mouth. The basic outline of a story remained the same, but since the story was being retold on different occasions with attention given to the audience's preference, details, and some aspects of the story would change. Once everything was printed, accepted versions came into being because the story could be codified. Freedom, anonymity, and multiplicity afforded by the internet, that rigid structure is now breaking down, and the original features of folklore where things can be changed, details vary, and specifics become blurry are returning. The Slenderman and the way in which the character develops are a prime example of this. Interestingly, this collaborative development also contributes to the effectiveness of the character and fits perfectly with the fact that he is depicted as faceless, by not having definable or recognizable features. Slenderman remains formless and also entirely malleable in the same way the universal boogeyman does. A creature known to be a threat by all but upon which anyone can project their own fears. Some scholars have also pointed out how the features that did develop to define the Slenderman's characteristics have their roots in much older folklore. For example, the character's status as a malevolent force dwelling in the forest or woods and threatening harm to children has massive echoes of the traditional Big Bad Wolf narratives, or the tales of the Headless Horseman, whilst the vagueness of his appearance and intentions and proclivity for kidnapping children links him to fairies and fae folk, a link that has been explored by noted scholars in folklore. The kidnapping element also ties the Slenderman character to other mythic bagmen known to carry off children, such as the European tradition of the bagman who would take children away. The stories surrounding the Slenderman and his ability to seemingly entice children to come to him rather than offering them violence, at least in any form that is explicitly described in the stories, has heavy echoes of the Pied Piper of Hamlin, this mythic figure who had the ability to induce rodents to follow him using his pipe and was therefore able to drive them out of the Hamlin was double-crossed by the people of the city who refused to pay him. As punishment, he used the same pipe and magical ability on the children of the city, leading them to follow him out of the city in a mesmerized procession. It has been pointed out that outside of the internet, the Slenderman retains power to concern and worry parents because he represents the classic notion of something that is a threat to children that they cannot fully explain or define. Again, this is partially due to Slenderman's inherent vagueness, in that most could not pin down his origins to, for example, a particular television show or game. He instead seems to concern parents to have been conjured from nothing and yet be a character that is known amongst children and teenagers. The idea that character reported to be able to entice children and adolescents within the stories so enticing and popular with them in the real world is a blurring of boundaries the parents found threatening, especially when Slenderman's influence was seen to have extended beyond the internet and into real life. In 2012, a girl in Wisconsin was stabbed 19 times by two classmates who then attributed their actions to being in the service of or trying to meet the demands laid down by Slenderman. Whilst one of the perpetrators also claimed to have spoken to Ninja Turtles and characters from the Harry Potter series, it was the reference to the ominous-sounding Slenderman that caught the public's imagination, particularly as this was something that the more tech-savvy younger generation seemed to be aware of, in which their parents were in the dark about, with the police chief of the area where the stabbings occurred, adding to the sense of trepidation by commenting that the internet is full of dark and wicked things. Following the incident, a moral panic rose in the United States, with parents and teachers voicing their concern about the possible negative influence of the Slenderman. These concerns were further driven into a frenzy by incidents in 2014 and 2015, which were linked to the Slenderman mythology. In a 2014 incident, a young girl was alleged to have set fire to her home in Florida with her mother and sibling inside, with media reports later pointing out that, amongst other things, the girl had been reading stories of the Slenderman. In the 2015 incident, a spate of attempted suicides among young people on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation was linked back to the character who was cited as being an influence. The involvement of supernatural forces in the suicide epidemic was underlined when a high-ranking official from the Ogallala Sioux tribe mentioned belief in a suicide spirit. Conversely, it is interesting to note that as the Slenderman entered the mainstream media and became linked to these real-life incidents, the character's popularity online showed significant signs of waning, with a massive dip in popularity and related output. It is also significant that it was in the wake of these real-life incidents that depictions of Slenderman as a benevolent and protecting figure first began to emerge. The fact that the Slenderman character in mythology was constructed by a disparate collection of creators over an extended period of time means that pinning down individual influences that may have contributed to the character's construction can be difficult. However, it is possible to trace some figures, tropes, and characteristics that almost undoubtedly helped shape the figure of the Slenderman. Amongst the influences that Knudsen had acknowledged are Stephen King, the figure of the tall man in the horror movie Phantasm, the work of H.P. Lovecraft as suggested by the appearance of tentacles, and the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. One of the most immediately obvious influences not mentioned by the author are the Men in Black characters that populate many science fiction television programs and have one incarnation in the Matrix films. Usually these figures are thought to represent some shadowy government agency rather than being cryptids or malevolent entities in their own rights, but the dark suit is definitely reminiscent. A spin-off of this theme and another possible influence are the characters of the gentleman from the Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode Hush, who, though they do sport facial features unlike the Slenderman, are malevolent beings with pale skin, bald heads, and dark suits who bear striking resemblances to the depictions of the Slenderman. Other suggested influences upon the character's later development are Jack Skellington from The Nightmare Before Christmas, who again sports a bald, pale head, although admittedly not featureless, is himself incredibly thin, and wears a dark suit. Finally, one of the most compelling possible influences is the DC comic character, the Question. This character, as well as wearing a suit, has an entirely featureless face and bears an uncanny resemblance to many of the Slenderman depictions seen in fan art. Whilst the existence of this character and a striking similarity in appearance does not necessarily mean that it was a direct influence upon the image of the Slenderman or was even known to the character's creator, it is interesting that Knudsen originally posted as Victor Surge. In the DC Comics, the Question's secret identity is Victor Sage.